The rain was pouring down as Detective Benjamin Parker parked his car at the gates of Central Park. The clock read 4 in the morning. The red and blue lights of police cars cut through the pre-dawn gloom. He threw on his raincoat and walked toward a group of officers standing under the trees. "Parker," he introduced himself briefly, showing his badge. "What do we got?" The young patrolman nodded toward the yellow tape. "Female, estimated 20 to 25 years old, discovered by a dog catcher an hour ago." Benjamin walked over to the body. "Me." Price was already at work. "Good morning, Ben." Price kept his eyes on his work. "As far as I can tell, death occurred between 10 o'clock and midnight. Multiple blunt force trauma to the head." Benjamin squatted down. The girl was face down, her dark hair slick with blood and rain. Modest dress, quality shoes. No signs of robbery. Earrings in her ears, a thin gold chain around her neck. "Anything to identify her?" "Purse." The patrolman held out a bag of evidence. "Valerie Bergman, age 24. Benjamin examined the driver's license, credit cards, a photograph of a young couple. The girl was smiling into the lens, snuggled up to the guy. "Check the phone," Benjamin said. "We need to find her loved ones." 3 hours later, Benjamin stood in front of the door of an elite house in the suburbs. The last calls from Valeria's phone were addressed to a certain Paul Polanski. The system showed them living together. The door was opened by a sleepy young man with disheveled hair. "Paul Polanski?" Benjamin showed his badge. "Detective Parker. May I come in?" "Is something wrong?" The guy's voice sounded wary. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. It's about Valerie Bergman." Pavel's face changed. He let the detective inside. "What about her? She didn't show up last night. She's not answering her cell phone. I thought she stayed at a friend's house." Benjamin looked into the young man's eyes. "I'm very sorry, but Miss Bergman was found dead this morning in Central Park." Paul froze, as if unable to understand the words. Then his face contorted, his knees buckled, and he sank heavily to the couch. "It's impossible," he whispered. "We were supposed to meet yesterday. I was delayed at the conference." His eyes filled with tears. Benjamin gave him time to recover, looking around the room. A cozy apartment, pictures on the walls, Pavel and Valeria in different places, on the beach, in the mountains, in a restaurant. "I realize this is hard, but I need to ask some questions." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Paul rose automatically and opened the door. On the threshold stood a middle-aged couple, a tall man with graying temples and a slender woman with neatly styled hair. "Son, we rushed over as soon as you called. What happened?" The woman hugged Pavel. "Mom, Dad, Valeria, she..." Pavel couldn't finish the sentence, bursting into tears on his mother's shoulder. Benjamin introduced himself. "Detective Benjamin Parker. Miss Bergman was murdered this night." The man turned pale, put his hand to his mouth. "Oh my God. Victor Polanski," he finally said. "This is my wife Barbara." "What happened, Detective?" The next hour passed in heavy conversation. The Polanski family seemed perfect. Successful architect father, psychotherapist mother, graduate student son. Valeria met with Paul for more than a year. They were going to get married in the summer. "When was the last time you saw Valeria?" Benjamin asked Pavel. "The night before last. Yesterday I was at a conference all day. I was supposed to be back by 8. We planned to have dinner together. But the panel ran late, so I texted her around 7 o'clock to tell her I'd be late. She replied that it was fine. Could I take a look at your correspondence?" Pavel held out his cell phone. Valeria's last message had been sent at 1912. "Everything's fine, honey. Decided to go shopping, then I'm going home. Love you." "You know where she was going?" "River Plaza Mall, I think. She goes there a lot. Used to go there." "Do you?" Benjamin turned to his parents. "Where were you last night?" "We had dinner at the Bellagio," Victor answered. "From 8 to 11 or so. Then straight home," Barbara added. "We live 15 minutes from here." "Did you know Valeria well?" "Of course," Barbara sighed sadly. "She was a wonderful girl. Smart, well-mannered. She and Pavel suited each other so well." Victor nodded, putting his hand on his son's shoulder. "We loved her like a daughter." Benjamin continued to ask questions. Valeria worked at the Vernissage Art Gallery, living with Pavel for the last 6 months. Parents are in another state. Few close friends, co-workers, a couple girlfriends. Did she have any conflicts? Someone who might have wished her harm? Pavel shook his head. Everyone loved Valeria. She was a bright person. You mentioned that you were delayed at the conference yesterday. Can anyone confirm that? Dozens of people. Pavel frowned. Do you think I might be involved? These are standard questions, Benjamin answered softly. I need the names of several witnesses. While Paul was compiling the list of colleagues, Benjamin noticed Victor tapping his fingers nervously on his knee. Barbara, on the other hand, remained motionless, only her eyes showing her inner tension. Mr. Polanski, you said you were at the restaurant from 8 to 11? Yes, Victor nodded. Our wedding anniversary, 27 years. And straight home? I already told you, Barbara intervened. We got home about 12:30. Together? The couple looked at each other. Well, I stopped at a gas station on the way, Victor said. Barbara drove straight home and I stayed about 15 minutes. Benjamin made a note in his notebook. A small discrepancy, probably nothing. But in his profession, little things were often crucial. Had Valeria ever mentioned that someone was following her? Maybe strange calls or messages? No. Pavel shook his head, then suddenly froze. Wait a minute, though. A couple weeks ago she said she felt someone's presence, thought it was just paranoia. Did she give any details? No. I suggested we go to the police, but she dismissed it. Said she was just imagining things. Benjamin looked at the Polanski family. Grief-stricken son, supportive parents, the perfect picture of grief. Too perfect? The detective's intuition rarely failed, but now it was telling him something didn't add up. I need to look through her things, he said, and I'd like a list of her contacts, friends, co-workers. Pavel nodded. Of course, I'll show you everything. Barbara stood up. I'll make some coffee. You've got a long day ahead of you, detective. Benjamin followed Paul into the bedroom. Valeria's things were neatly laid out. Clothes in the closet, cosmetics on the dressing table, books on the shelf, laptop on the desk. I'll need the computer too, the detective said, and her cell phone if you have one. The phone was with her. Pavel swallowed. Take the laptop. While the young man took out the charger, Benjamin took a quick look at the bedside table. A book, reading glasses, a framed photo of Pavel and Valeria against the ocean. In a drawer, a notebook, a few receipts, a pack of headache pills, and another photograph tucked behind the drawer's lining. Benjamin carefully pulled it out. Valeria in the company of an older woman. Who's that with Valeria? The detective asked, showing the picture. Pavel took a look. Her grandmother, the only close person in the family. Died 3 months ago. Benjamin nodded, handing back the photograph. Something didn't add up here. Why had the picture been hidden? He mentally noted to check Valeria's family connections more carefully. When he returned to the living room, he saw Victor talking on the phone, turning away from the window. Hearing footsteps, the man quickly ended the conversation. Colleagues, he explained. I warned them I wouldn't be here today. Barbara put the tray of coffee on the table. Detective, will you find who did this? I'll do my best, Mrs. Polanski, Benjamin replied. A killer always leaves a trail. Victor shuddered, then coughed, covering his mouth with his hand. Barbara placed her palm on her husband's hand, a gesture of support or warning. One more question. Benjamin looked at Paul. Valeria was supposed to meet with you last night. What do you think she was doing in the park at night? Pavel shook his head confusedly. I have no idea. She never went there alone, especially in the dark. So she could have had an appointment, the detective said thoughtfully, with someone she trusted. Victor and Barbara's eyes met for a moment. Benjamin intercepted that look, another detail to add to his suspicions. I'll be in touch, he said, rising. I may have more questions. As he left the apartment, Benjamin took another look at the Polanski family. Something about their testimony didn't add up. Victor and Barbara said they were at the restaurant until 11 o'clock and then split up. Valerie's time of death was between 10 o'clock and midnight. That's an interesting coincidence. Take care of yourself, he said in parting. And if you remember anything important, call me anytime. Already in the car, Benjamin made notes. Check the alibis of all three of them. Examine surveillance footage around the park. Examine the victim's cell phone and laptop. Interview co-workers and friends. And talk to the family again, individually. Sometimes people say things when there are no witnesses. The rain finally stopped. Benjamin started the car and headed for the station. The case was just beginning, but he already felt, under the mask of the perfect Polanski family hides something dark. Benjamin Parker's office was lit by a lone desk lamp. It was getting dark outside the window. It had been 24 hours since the discovery of the body. On the wall already hung a scheme with photos of the participants of the case. In the center was the smiling face of Valerie Bergman. Benjamin rubbed his eyes tiredly and looked at the laptop screen again. The technical department had recovered the data from the victim's phone and handed over a copy of the correspondences. Standard messages. Girlfriends discussed work. Paul wrote about domestic issues. Nothing out of the ordinary. However, there was another dialogue in which the interlocutor was saved as V. Just one letter. The correspondence began 2 months ago and became more and more intense. Yesterday was magical. I miss you already. Can't stop thinking about you. How can we meet tomorrow? He's at a conference all day. The last text from V came at 18:30 on the day of the murder. Meet me at 10 at our bench. We need to talk. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. Who was this mysterious V? Victor? Based on the content of the correspondence, Valeria was definitely dating someone other than Pavel. It could completely change the picture of the crime. The door creaked. Betty Price, forensics expert, entered the office. Hello, Ben. Forensics results? Benjamin took the outstretched folder. Anything interesting? Epithelial cells were found under the victim's fingernails. DNA's being analyzed. Also found traces of expensive cologne on the clothes. What kind of cologne? Visconti's Balance. Cost me a month's salary. If the killer used it, we have a lead. Thanks, Betty. Check one more thing, please. Benjamin handed her the list. These are the customers at the Bellagio restaurant last night. We need to confirm the presence of Victor and Barbara Polanski from 8 to 11. Left alone, Benjamin went back to studying the materials. The surveillance footage showed that Valeria had indeed visited the River Plaza shopping center around 8 o'clock in the evening. She spent just under an hour there, bought nothing, then took a cab. He dialed the cab company's number. Detective Parker, Police Department, I need information about a ride last night. He gave details. 5 minutes later, he got a call back. Driver confirms he picked up the girl at River Plaza at 21:45. Dropped her off at the 5th Avenue entrance to Central Park at 22:45. Did she say why she was going to the park? No. She was quiet, just said she was in a hurry to meet someone. Benjamin thanked her and hung up. If Valeria arrived at the park at 22:05 and was killed between 22 and midnight, then she met someone there. The V? Phone's ringing. Parker here. Detective, it's Barbara Polanski. Yeah, I need to talk to you, alone. Anything ring a bell? Not over the phone. Can I come to your station? In an hour? Sure. Exactly 1 hour later, Barbara Polanski sat across from him. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Pale face. I wasn't completely honest yesterday, she began. Victor didn't stop at the gas station. We had a fight at the restaurant, and he left early, about 10 o'clock. Why did you cover it up? I didn't want to get Victor in trouble. He and I are going through a rough patch. And where has he been since 10 o'clock? He said he went to the office to finish a project. He got home around midnight. Benjamin looked at the woman carefully. Why did you decide to tell me this now? Barbara averted her eyes. Because I'm not sure of where he really was. The last few months he's been different. Staying out late, getting strange phone calls. Do you think he's having an affair? I don't know. I don't want to believe it, but after Valerie's murder... Her voice shook. I need to be sure he had nothing to do with it. Does your husband have Visconti's Balance cologne? Barbara looked at him in surprise. Yes, it's his favorite. How do you know? Intuition, Benjamin answered evasively. Mrs. Polanski, do you have the keys to his office? Yes, but I need to see his workplace. If he's not involved, it will only confirm his alibi. Barbara hesitated for a moment, then pulled a bunch of keys out of her purse. 5th floor, office 512. Thank you for your cooperation. Also, don't tell your husband about our conversation. At least not yet. An hour later, Benjamin was looking around Victor Polanski's office. Perfect order, minimalist design, a massive dark wood desk, an ergonomic chair, several shelves with project folders. In the desk, he found a standard set of office supplies. Nothing suspicious. The computer was locked with a password. The technicians would deal with it later. Benjamin methodically continued his search. Behind a painting on the wall, he found a small safe. Interesting. Can't open it without a technician. I'll have to get a warrant. The phone vibrated. A message from Betty. Victor and Barbara Polanski checked into the Bellagio at 20:05. They left the restaurant. Victor at 21:55, Barbara at 22:40. So Barbara was telling the truth. Victor left the restaurant at about 10. If Valeria arrived at the park at 22:05, and the message about the meeting was for 22:000, theoretically, Victor could make it in time. Benjamin took another look around the office, then closed the door and headed for the Vernissage Gallery, Valeria's place of work. The gallery was housed in an old building with stained glass windows. Inside there was an exhibition of contemporary paintings. Behind the receptionist's desk sat a young woman, looking curiously at his badge. "What can I do for you, detective?" "I'm investigating the murder of Valerie Bergman. You two work together?" The girl turned pale. "Yes, I'm Pauline. We were on the same shift. I can't believe she..." She covered her mouth with her hand. "It's horrible. Tell me about her. What was she like?" "Talented, smart. She knew art better than most experts. Her clients adored her." "Any particularly frequent visitors?" Pauline thought for a moment. "A few collectors. And her boyfriend's father, Victor Polanski. He'd been coming in a lot in recent months." Benjamin tensed. "How often?" "Once a week, maybe more. Said he was consulting on the design of his projects, but..." "But?" Pauline lowered her voice. "Between you and me, he was clearly flirting with her. I even asked Valeria if that wasn't strange, considering he's her boyfriend's father. She waved it off, said he was just being gallant." "When was the last time he came over?" "The day before yesterday. They had a long conversation in the back hall. I couldn't hear what it was about." "Did Valeria seem troubled lately?" "Yeah, a little nervous, especially after the phone calls." "What calls?" I don't know. She'd go out to talk, come back upset." Benjamin wrote down the statement and thanked the girl. The picture was slowly becoming clearer. Victor Polanski had a special interest in Valerie. Could it have developed into something more? Or vice versa? Could it be that she had rejected his advances and this had led to tragedy? On the way to the station, Benjamin got a call from the tech department. "Detective, we checked the cloud backup from the victim's cell phone. There are some photos you should see." The department handed him a folder of printouts. Benjamin slowly flipped through the photos. Most of them showed Valerie in an intimate setting with an older man. The man's face was not visible, but his build and graying temples left no doubt. It was Victor Polanski. When were these photos taken? According to the metadata, a month and a half to 2 weeks ago. The most recent ones were taken on the 9th. Benjamin thought about it. It all made sense now. From the correspondence is Victor. Valeria was having an affair with her boyfriend's father. Perhaps she threatened to tell all, and Victor decided to stop her. There was one important step left. Reconstruct the last hours of Valerie's life and figure out what happened in the park. Benjamin returned to the crime scene. It was evening, and the park was empty. He walked along the path where the body had been found. According to the cab driver's testimony, Valeria entered through the main gate and headed deep into the park. What had brought her here late at night? On a nearby bench, he noticed the carved initials B+B. Coincidence? Or their special place? Benjamin surveyed the ground around him. The rain had washed away most of the footprints, but something glittered under the bench. He bent down and picked up a cufflink engraved VP. Victor Polanski. Now he had not only motivation, but tangible evidence linking the suspect to the crime scene. Benjamin envisioned how it could happen. Valeria arrives at the park, meets Victor. They talk, possibly argue. She could have threatened to expose their relationship, which would have ruined his family and career. A moment of heat, a blow, Another blow. He shook his head, chasing away the dark images. It was time to act. But first, a conversation with Pavel. The young man deserved to know the truth about his fiancée, however bitter. Pavel opened the door after the third ring. He looked gaunt, eyes red from tears or sleeplessness. "Detective, any news? May I come in? We need to talk." The apartment was a mess. Unwashed dishes, things strewn about. There was an empty bottle of whiskey on the table. "I'm sorry about the mess," Pavel muttered. "I can't get my thoughts together." "I understand," Benjamin nodded. "What can you say about the relationship between Valeria and your father?" Pavel blinked in surprise. "What do you mean? Did they communicate often?" "Well, my father sometimes came to the gallery. He consulted on his work. Why?" Benjamin pulled out his phone and showed one of the least explicit photos, Victor and Valeria sitting in a restaurant holding hands. "This goes beyond work counseling, don't you think?" Pavel's face contorted. "What is this nonsense? It's a fake! Father would never... Valeria could never... I have proof of an affair that lasted at least 2 months. Correspondence, photos, witness statements." Pavel grabbed the bottle and took a big gulp from the neck. "Impossible, you've got it all wrong. Valeria met your father in the park the evening of the murder. We found his cufflink at the crime scene." Pavel's hand froze halfway through with the bottle. "You're accusing my father of murder?" "He has no alibi for the time of the crime. He left the restaurant at 22. Valeria arrived at the park at 22:05. No. Pavel shook his head, then suddenly threw the bottle at the wall. The glass shattered. Whiskey dripped down the wallpaper. "That whore! She cheated on me with my own father!" Benjamin tensed, ready to intercept Paul if he became violent. "Calm down, Mr. Polanski! Calm down!" Pavel yelled. "Do you realize what you're saying? My fiancé was fucking my father, and now you're accusing him of murder. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just following the evidence." Pavel collapsed on the sofa, wrapping his arms around his head. "It's a nightmare. Where is your father now?" "I don't know. At home, I guess. Or at the office." "Listen," Benjamin sat down next to her. "I need your help. If your father's innocent, we can prove it. But right now, all the evidence points to him." Paul raised his head, tears of rage and despair in his eyes. "I can't believe it. Valeria, Father, this is all a mistake. When was the last time you spoke to your father?" "This morning. He called to check on me." "How was he?" "He was fine. Concerned. Like a man who'd had his future daughter-in-law murdered, not his mistress." Benjamin stood up. "I need to talk to him. Can you call? Find out where he is?" Paul reluctantly took out his cell phone and dialed a number. After a few beeps, the answering machine answered. "No answer. What now?" "I'll go to his house. Would you like to come with me?" Pavel shook his head. "No, I'm not ready to see him now. Not after what you told me." Benjamin left his card. "Call me if he contacts you. Hang in there. Truth is always better than ignorance, even if it's painful." On the way to Polanski's house, the detective pondered the situation. All the evidence pointed to Victor, but something was bothering him. Maybe it was too obvious. The luxurious mansion greeted him with dark windows. Benjamin rang the doorbell, but no one answered. A neighbor walking her dog said she'd seen Mrs. Polanski leave about an hour ago with a suitcase. It looked suspicious. Was Barbara really helping her husband hide? Or was she hiding something herself? Benjamin got back in the car and contacted the officer on duty. "I need a warrant to search Victor Polanski's home and office, and to put him and his wife on the wanted list. They may be leaving town." Half an hour later, a support team pulled up. With warrant in hand, Benjamin entered the house. Inside, there was perfect order, too perfect for a hasty getaway. Methodically searching the rooms, he found a small safe behind a painting in Victor's office, the same one he'd found in the office. This one, however, was unlocked. Inside was an old photograph of a young woman who looked very much like Valeria, and a letter. Benjamin unfolded the yellowed sheet. A woman's handwriting, the date 25 years ago. "Victor, I can't keep quiet any longer. You must know the truth about your daughter. Veronica did not die in childbirth, as I told you. I gave her up for adoption because I couldn't destroy your family. Forgive me if you can. Vera." A daughter? Benjamin reread the letter. If Victor had a daughter born out of wedlock 25 years ago. A new theory lined up in his head. Valeria Bergman had been born 24 years ago. Could she be that daughter? And if so, did Victor know about it? Did Valerie herself know? It changed the whole picture of the crime. Not a love affair, but incest? Or did Victor find out the truth too late? The phone vibrated in his pocket. "Parker, here. Detective, this is Patrolman Garcia. We just picked up Victor Polanski. He was trying to buy a plane ticket to Mexico. Don't let him talk to anyone. I'm on my way." Benjamin put the letter and the photograph in an evidence bag. Now he had enough evidence to nail Victor to the wall and get a confession to the murder. On the way back to the station, he continued to ponder. What if Valeria had found out Victor was her father, threatened him with exposure? Or had he learned the truth and couldn't live with the realization of the sin he'd committed? In any case, the bloody denouement of this story was predetermined by the choice made a quarter of a century ago. The vicious circle closed, turning the father into a murderer and the daughter into a victim. The lights of the police station loomed ahead. It was time to put an end to this case and reveal the last secrets of the Polanski family. Benjamin sat at his desk, going through the case files. Outside the window, dawn was coloring the city in pink tones, but the detective did not notice this beauty. His gaze was fixed on the screen of the laptop, which played a recording from the video surveillance camera of the shopping center. In the footage, Valeria was talking to someone on the phone, looking anxious. The time on the tape was 1943. Benjamin scrolled the tape further. The girl headed for the exit, looking around as if she was afraid of being followed. Already at the door, she paused, pulling out her cell phone again. Her lips uttered a phrase that Benjamin, despite the lack of sound, was able to make out. "I can't take it anymore." The tech department recovered the data from her phone's cloud storage. Among the deleted files was a miniature camera disguised as a brooch. Valeria had worn it in recent weeks. The detail was present in many photos. "She was recording her meetings with Victor," Benjamin muttered. But why? The answer came unexpectedly. The officer brought an envelope with the results of the search of Valeria's apartment. Among the seized items was a flash drive found in the secret pocket of her cosmetic bag. Benjamin plugged in the device. It contained dozens of videos. Valeria's meetings with Victor in various places. Restaurants, hotel rooms, Victor's car. The last video was dated the day of the murder. The quality of the video was poor. The brooch camera couldn't boast of high resolution. But the audio was clear. "Victor, we have to finish this. We can't go on like this. You said that last time, but then you called me. It's different now. I can't deceive Pavel anymore. He won't know anything. He will, because I'll tell him." "What?" "I'll tell him everything, about us, tomorrow." "Are you crazy? It'll ruin my family, my career. I can't live a lie anymore. No, I won't allow it. Don't threaten me, Victor. Look, let's meet tonight. We'll talk quietly. In the park, on our bench, 10 o'clock. Okay, but my decision won't change." The recording cut off. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. This was the proof. A direct threat from Victor, a meeting in the park at the exact time of the murder. But he had to be careful. The video confirmed the motive, but not the crime itself. Benjamin dialed Betty Price's number. "Good morning. Any results on the Valerie Bergman case?" "I was just about to call." Betty's voice sounded agitated. "Remember that expensive cologne they found on the victim's clothes? We checked it out. It does belong to Victor Polanski, and there's blood with his DNA under the victim's fingernails. Is there a scratch on his neck?" "I didn't notice it, but I'll check it out." "Thanks, Betty." Benjamin took a quick look at the photos from Victor's interrogation. In one of the pictures, when the suspect turned his head, there was indeed a long scratch at the base of his neck, partially hidden by his shirt collar. Another piece of evidence. But it still lacked a decisive piece of evidence. Benjamin had an idea. He headed over to tech. "Check the park cameras again, especially the east entrance between 22 and 23. The technician looked perplexed at the detective. "We already did. You can barely see anything there because of the rain. Use the new image enhancement program. I need to see who left the park after Valeria." After 2 hours of tense waiting, the result was ready. The enhanced image was still blurry, but the silhouette of the man hurrying out of the park at 22:54 was recognizable. Tall, with the characteristic gait of Victor Polanski. "Freeze frame." Benjamin ordered. Zoom in on this area. A dark stain was visible on the man's right arm. Blood? Benjamin got what he was looking for. Print everything out, he told the technician, and send a copy to the prosecutor. On the way to the cell where Victor was being held, Benjamin mentally organized the sequence of events Valeria threatened to expose Victor. Fearing for his reputation and family, set up a meeting in a secluded place. In a fit of anger, he grabbed something heavy, a rock or a branch, and struck a fatal blow. Victor Polanski looked gaunt. His elegance was gone, leaving a haggard man with circles under his eyes. Detective, he smiled weakly. Did you find the real killer? Yes. Benjamin sat down across from him. You. Victor flinched, but quickly pulled himself together. These accusations again? I already told you. I met her in the park, but I left early. She was alive. You left the park at 22:54, with traces of blood on your arm. Victor looked at the photos and turned pale. It's not me. The image is too blurry. We have a recording of your conversation with Valeria the day before the murder. You threatened her. I didn't threaten her, Benjamin interrupted him. Your blood was found under her fingernails. There's a scratch on your neck. There's traces of your cologne on her clothes. Your cufflink at the scene. Confess, Victor, you killed her because she was going to tell Pavel. There was silence. Victor stared into the space in front of him, as if he could see something beyond the detective's eyes. His hands clenched into fists, then slowly unclenched. He hunched over, his shoulders slumping as if a heavy weight had been lifted from them. She didn't realize, he finally said quietly. She didn't realize what she'd do. Benjamin waited silently. I loved her, Victor continued. Really loved her. Not as a fling. She was. Special. And that's why you killed her? I didn't mean to. Victor slammed his fist on the table. I swear I didn't mean to. I tried to convince her to keep our relationship a secret. I offered her money. I promised to divorce Barbara, but she became obsessed with the idea of honesty. His voice shook. That night I begged her, on my knees, but she was adamant, said she loved Paul and had to be honest with him, that our liaison was a mistake. I lost control. What happened next? She turned to leave. I grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away, scratched me. There was a rock nearby. I don't even remember picking it up. I only remember the look in her eyes. Surprised, frightened. And then, Victor covered his face with his hands. God, what have I done? Benjamin wrote down the confession, feeling not the satisfaction of a solved case, but the weight of human tragedy. Do you understand your rights? Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I understand. Victor nodded. You know, in a way, I'm relieved. Living with it. Unbearable. What did you do with the rock? Threw it in the lake. And I tried to wash the blood off my hands, but, He looked at his hands as if he could still see the marks of the crime. Some stains don't wash off, right, detective? The officers took Victor away for formal arrest and paperwork. Benjamin was left alone in the room, gathering papers. He had another difficult conversation to have with Paul and Barbara. Barbara arrived at the station an hour after the call. She looked collected, but her eyes betrayed an inner pain. Is it true? She asked as she entered Benjamin's office. Victor really... Yes, he confessed. Barbara slowly lowered herself into a chair. I knew he was cheating on me. But the murder... Were you suspicious of his relationship with Valeria? Of course. Victor had always had a weakness for young women. But they were usually flings. And with Valeria? He fell in love. Barbara grinned bitterly. I could see it in his eyes, the way he had once looked at me. Why didn't you leave him? 27 years of marriage, detective. Shared son, shared memories. I thought that would go away too. She shook her head. I was even willing to turn a blind eye to his affair, but not the murder. Did you know he met her in the park that night? No. He said he was on his way to the office. I believed it. Her voice shook. How did Pavel take the news? He doesn't know yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Barbara nodded. That's the right thing to do. He'll be devastated. Losing a girl and then finding out she was killed by your father, who was her lover. She closed her eyes. My poor boy. Would you like to be present for this conversation? Yes, he'll need support. Pavel arrived half an hour later. He looked haggard, but there was hope in his eyes. Did you find the murderer? He asked from the doorway. Benjamin looked at Barbara, and she nodded faintly. Yes, we did. Please sit down, Pavel. The young man slowly lowered himself into the chair, shifting his gaze from the detective to his mother. What's going on? Why are you both so serious? Pavel, Benjamin began. Your father and Valeria were having an affair. Pavel's face froze. What? They had been dating for the last 2 months. No. Pavel shook his head. No, that's impossible. Valeria loved me. We have proof, Benjamin said softly. Pictures, videos, their correspondence. She was going to confess to you. And that's why... Pavel stopped, unable to utter the terrible words. Your father killed her, Benjamin finished for him. They met in the park in the evening. She said she was going to tell you everything. He tried to talk her out of it, but she was adamant. There was an argument and... No! Paul jumped up, knocking over a chair. No, no, no! Barbara got up and tried to hug her son, but he pushed her away. Did you know? Did you know about them? I suspected that your father had someone, she answered quietly. But I didn't know it was Valeria. You all lied to me, shouted Pavel. She, you, your father, my whole life is a lie. Pavel, please. Barbara held out her hand, but he withdrew it again. I want to see him, he said to the detective. I want to look into the eyes of the man who ruined everything. Benjamin hesitated. Such an encounter might be too emotional, but perhaps it was necessary to heal the wounds. Okay, but I will be present. Victor was led to the visiting room. He sat at the table, handcuffed, and looked up when his son entered. There was a mixture of shame and fear in his gaze. Pavel, why? The young man's voice was ringing with tension. Why her? Why you? Victor lowered his head. I can't explain it. I fell in love with her. In love? Pavel laughed a bitter, broken laugh. So much so that you killed her? I didn't mean to, Victor whispered. Believe me, son, I never... Don't you dare call me son! Pavel slammed his fist on the table. You're not my father anymore! You killed the woman I loved, the woman I was going to marry! I know, Victor cried, not hiding his tears. I've ruined everything. My life, your mother's life. I deserve to be punished. No punishment will bring Valeria back, Pavel gritted his teeth. And it won't undo what you've done. He turned to Benjamin. I'm done. I have nothing more to say to that man. Pavel walked out, slamming the door. Victor followed him with a lost look. He will never forgive me, he said quietly. Maybe in time, Benjamin answered, though he didn't believe it himself. In the hallway, he found Paul leaning against the wall. The young man looked devastated. What now? He asked. How to go on living? Day by day, Benjamin answered. Sometimes that's all we can do. Benjamin went back to his office and finished the report. Valeria Bergman's case was closed. Victor Polanski will receive his punishment according to the law, but the real punishment, the loss of his family and self-destruction, had already caught up with him. Benjamin looked at Valerie's picture, beautiful, young, with her whole life ahead of her, dead because she was caught between father and son, a passion that should have remained a secret. There are no happy endings in police work, Benjamin thought. Only varying degrees of tragedy, and all he could do was give the victims justice and their loved ones a chance to move on with their lives. He closed the case file and put it in the closed investigations drawer. There was a new day and new crimes ahead. That was his job, to untangle the knots of human passions and crimes committed out of the oldest motives: love, jealousy, and fear. The ringing of the phone brought him back to reality. The world had not stopped, and Detective Benjamin Parker had to move on with it.